Wow. Van Halen, wow. 1986, maybe? Sammy Hagar. So thank you very much for having me. My name is Tim Hanlon. I work at an agency unit, a Publicis group called VivaKi. Okay, so if I had a dime for everybody over the last 3 months who came up to me and said, what the hell is VivaKi? And if I had an answer for it, I would certainly share it with you. No. VivaKi is a combination of two words. We mashed it up. Viva meaning flow, meaning life in Spanish, and ki meaning flow of life or circle of life, apparently in Chinese and some other language. And we mashed them together, and lo and behold, the domain name was available, so we grabbed it. And that's what we basically have done. We've created what we think is a nice meld of digital and media assets, sort of as an engine for innovation throughout Publicis Group. All right? So what you see basically that is comprised of the media agencies of Publicis Group, the former Publicis Group Media, Digitas, which is Publicis's digital agency of record, and a bunch of other things, including our mobile expertise in Phone Valley, our friends at Performix, which are newly acquired from our friends at Google. And we've created basically an engine of what we hope is innovation to get our agencies and our clients to move faster and more boldly into the realm of digital plus media, right? This is a fairly bold idea. I think strategically and conceptually it makes a ton of sense. The devil, of course, is in the details. But if we can create centralized approaches to buying, to technology, to platforms that we can serve and help funnel into our various agencies and our clients, perhaps we can be in a much better place than we are today. And I would argue collectively, and I was not here yesterday for Don's spiel from Havas, but let's be honest, right? In the holding company world, the big five, the big six, whatever the number you want to sort of use, we're a sorry lot right now, right? We are basically flat-footed in the midst of a generational and then some change that's going on in our business. And you could argue that being the biggest buyer of media, let's say a WPP on a good day, an Omnicom on a good day, who knows who's the biggest right now, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're well-equipped to be the most savvy knowledge broker when it comes to, say, an RSS feed strategy, right? So I would argue holding companies sort of have this luxury of being aligned with all the biggest brands and the biggest marketing budgets out there, but I would argue we're actually diametrically opposite in terms of our ability to change, to innovate, and to keep ahead, to keep a pace of what's going on in this frenetic change. So as your roving, conscientious objector to the holding company model, take some of these thoughts with you as possible thought agents or change pieces for your respective businesses. This is largely going to be some thought about, frankly, where we kind of are right now. So you will notice that in my previous slide, you will see I'm calling it sort of the era of transparency. I'm trying to struggle with what really this is all about, but transparency is a word that keeps coming up and over and over and over again, where I think we're basically now outside of our black boxes and we are now naked to the world. And if we don't recognize that we are, as agency professionals and people in the marketing business, that all of our efforts, all of our activities, all of our actions are being seen by everybody out there, not just our clients, right, but also everybody out there, our competitors, the consumers. And you will notice there's a little sort of acronym there, and if you're in the texting world, you may know what this means, but I'll sort of give you a hint, and you'll sort of get a sense of this as we go along here. It's kind of like put up or shut up time. And if we don't change more quickly, we are actually going to be toast. So some universal truths, right? Some of this stuff is not, it's pretty obvious, right? So I'm kind of a master of the obvious. But if you guys don't sort of recognize, people don't realize this yet, get with it, right? So I think things like transparency are absolutely par for the course these days. I think we're in a world where open platforms will dominate more so than closed systems and black boxes and approaches, right? So I would argue lowering barriers to entry. We are now being forced to compete with individuals with credit cards, right, who can now create their own ad campaigns and place media, right, in various digital forms, where in the old days it was call the agency and we'll take care of it that way. Those days are done. And again, I think you see people, right, directly in control. I mean, this is a completely revolutionary time where professionals don't necessarily have all the answers. So let's look at what I call SGOT-P, and if you haven't figured out what that means, it's time to put up or shut up, or go to the John or off the pot, right? So let's look at some of these things that I think are wrenching through our industry right now. So measurement, data, analytics, right? Don basically talked about this before yesterday, and if you don't think you're in a marketing business driven by data, you might want to find something else to do. And data is going to drive things in so many different ways, right? So great, we've got Arbitron to measure radio. We've got Nielsen to measure television. And let's be honest, those are antiquated methods by which we can measure consumption of various media today. I would strongly suggest that consumers are far ahead of the media industry's ability to measure, right? The way people consume media, both in legal and illegal ways, is already far ahead of the currencies that we have today to evaluate and to buy and sell against. I mean, you heard Randall talk about this the other day in this video snippet from Ad Age. It's not a question of measurement. I think we're entering into a world where we are going to be overwhelmed by data, right? And we need to be receptive to that. We need to be anticipatory to that. We need to be sponges for all that kind of data. And because of that, we're going to need to readjust our methods of how we analyze success and what actions we take. The problem is not going to be the data, right? Well, it's going to be the data. We're going to need to basically process it and figure out how do we handle all of it. But the real big issue is how do we translate all that data into meaningful currency, right? As a seller, how are you going to say and utilize certain data to tell the story properly and add value to what your offerings are? And how are we as buyers of media and marketers going to ascribe the same kind of and I think right now the time for experimentation in data is now, right? So when I hear Nielsen, and I'm singling them out because they're basically the monopolist in the television and video space, talk about how they're going to measure video everywhere, I don't see it yet, right? I think about nonlinear video. So I look at RentTrack as possibly a place where we can look at things like video on demand, right? How do we ascertain how people watched and consumed on-demand video and the advertising that might be encompassed in that? I don't see that data from Nielsen yet. I look at online video, which is exploding and decentralizing in ways that are just hard to comprehend and certainly hard to keep track of, right? When you live in a world of embedded videos where people can grab and post stuff wherever they might want to put it, I mean, that completely upends the distribution mechanism of most major media companies. And it's not about whatever your brand name is .com and coming in through that front portal. Sure, we can measure that, but what about those grab and post kinds of strategies? How do we measure that kind of stuff? So you look at a company like Visible Measures, which a company didn't even exist a year and a half ago, that basically is focused solely on online video consumption and how it gets penetrated out there into the ether by people-powered embeds and whatnot, right? And these are just representative examples, but as a ventures guy in VivaKi, which is the practice that I oversee, these are companies that are interesting to us because they may help us tell the story better, they may help us get to more granular measurement, and they're certainly, hopefully, going to get us closer to currency. So you look at, you've got to give kudos to the NBC Universal folks this year when they did in their Olympic stuff, this TAMI index, Total Audience Measurement Index. What was it? It was taking the Nielsen data for television viewership of the Olympics and then marrying that with a whole host of quote-unquote alternate measurement sources to tell a fuller story about how people were watching, consuming, sharing, talking about the Olympics, right? With stuff being available on broadband video, with stuff being available in mobile, a whole bunch of stuff available on digital, as well as regular television, HD television, on-demand television. It doesn't seem that there wasn't a platform that NBC Universal was not experimenting with or playing through with the Olympics. Well, the joke was, the only real thing that you can value in the buy-sell exchange was the Nielsen ratings. And I think that's a crock. In today's world where you've got audiences, 35 and younger, let's say, arbitrary number, who are consuming and sharing and mashing up and doing all kinds of stuff in ways that we can't even sort of not only not measure, but then ascribe currency to, we may be chasing the tail of a dog that's already a mile ahead of us. Unless we try to somehow figure out a way that we can zoom ahead of that dog and catch up to it and then be ready for it as it runs into our arms. That's literally the next level we need to get to. And I think you've got to boldly embrace new forms of measurement and mutually believe that what really is happening out there is far more sophisticated than the current models that we have today. So I'm not here to necessarily bash Nielsen or Arbitron or any of the other traditional status quo, but we've got to get to better places. I mean, a company like IMMI, based in San Mateo, which is a video across multiple touch points play. It is a software system that sits in a cell phone, right? It's not a portable people meter thing, a separate device that one needs to have to wear on their belt loop for a year. If anybody out of Chicago knows, there's a longtime talk radio host by the name of Steve Dahl, who just basically got fired from his radio station in Chicago a long time. He was there for 30 years or so. And he was very right. He came out and said, no sane human being would agree to wear a device that's a little bit bigger than this, a portable people meter, on their belt loop for a year to better ascribe their measurement of how they're listening to radio. Just as much as no sane person would probably fill out a paper diary and mail it in, which is Arbitron's current, traditional method in still most of the marketplaces. If you could get rid of this boxy little proprietary thing and put this as a piece of software into something that everybody carries around, a cell phone, that might be a better, more actionable and less intrusive way to actually measure people's consumption of audio and radio and television. So IMMI was part of the NBC TAMI thing too, right? So how do we ascribe, and this has been an age-old issue for people like ESPN and NBC and late night shows and stuff, how do we get credit for the consumption of video in out-of-home environments, in college dorms, in bars, and those kinds of places? If you're a radio station, if you're in the audio space, how do you get credit for the multiple channels that are getting pushed in a car radio scenario? Those are far more sophisticated than somebody remembering something and writing it on a piece of paper and then remembering to mail it in for an incentive of $50 for 3 months. It's ridiculous. The way we measure online, I mean, Quantcast is I believe, a partial sponsor of this event. The Quantcast, is almost ingenious in that it's actually going directly to the sources, right? It's tagging pages and getting to things that are beyond just simple log files and outside of this sort of ridiculous witch's brew of ComScore and net ratings, this panel-based thing, right? We're a world now where panels can't keep up with how many permutations of consumption there are, right? We've got to get to things like census, right? We need to get to aggregated sources of data, and reams of it. Now, this is the problem, though, right? Be careful what you wish for. If you're in the agency business, if you're a media buyer in particular, you at once crave this data, and yet you're also scared witless by it, right? Because you can't process all of it, right? Every click stream, every data point, every piece of information that comes in, we can't keep up with, right? We maybe put into a spreadsheet if we're lucky. So if that doesn't sound like an opportunity to people who are in the software business or in the enterprise solutions business, there is a big one right there, is to be able to absorb. We hope in VivaKi we will have some of those sources, both internally proprietarily as well as through external partnerships, where we can, via a dashboard type of strategy, look at all of the things that are happening for our clients' brands and our activities and be able to process them and really make intelligent decisions off of them. So even in some non-obvious ways, so our friends at Anchor Intelligence, which is relatively new, relatively new company, is in the space ostensibly of click and fraud measurement, really is actually maybe some of the harbingers of how we actually get to proof of concept for our search activities, right? So, Google supposedly is sort of the end-all and be-all for search, right? And we really don't have much of a choice. So that's fair enough, but we really can't tell, based on the stuff that we get back from them, what's really working and well, certainly what's working, but, the level of potential fraudulent type of activity, right? So there's kind of an opaqueness there. And this is not just a Google issue, this is with everybody in the search space, right? So you can imagine the ability to be able to sort of get to some of the quality of traffic issues, right? Where we can start to parse out in a transparent, open source kind of way, what traffic is the most quality of traffic, right? And which ones are coming from, let's say, nefarious sources. So what you sort of see here in this little build-up here on these slides is these dots are all representative of various IP traffic, and then you can start, through the Anchor Intelligence technology, get to some kind of senses of patterns of behavior amongst various IP addresses, and then start to put sort of things together to tell that some of them are a little more coordinated than you would normally expect. And frankly, marketers and agencies are going to start to ask for this kind of stuff and expect an open book on what's working and what's not working, right? So if 20% or so, let's say, or 15% of my traffic is coming from nefarious sources in Eastern Europe, that's stuff, as a marketer, I don't want to pay for, and I shouldn't have to pay for. Yet, I would argue in today's sort of early days of search, we may be paying for. I don't know if that's a cost of doing business, or it's just something that we can get rid of over time. I would argue it's something we can somewhat easily get rid of over time. Measurement in social environments, right? So a company like Rapleaf, a very interesting company. So you look at this chart, it's a little sort of busy, but there are two things sort of happening in this chart. And this gives you some insight as to what social networking and social media is all about. And there's another monitoring thing that we need to do and more data that we need to process. So if you look at the left-hand side of this chart, you'll see the yellow swatches sort of going outside the boundaries of the black lines. The yellow basically is indicative of our female audiences, and the black line is indicative of male audiences. And interesting, if you look at it, it's all parsed across age groups. The younger audiences, it seems that in the teenage years and the adolescent years, more women tend to be active in social networking activities than men, okay, which I think is very interesting. And then it sort of hones down and gets to be somewhat common over time as that funnel grows. But also, there's the other thing going on here is that obviously the younger audiences, this is sort of par for the course of their behavior, social networking and social behavior, as it gets older. But you wonder if that sort of funnel changes over the next 5 or 10 years. As these younger kids get older and start getting their first and second jobs in life, does that big fat part of the funnel stay fat and big as they get older over time? I would argue this is a generational change that's happening right before our very eyes, right? So if you're a traditional classic media company, if you're a traditional brand marketer, and you're thinking that social media is this a curiosity, right? Or is this thing to be monitored, I would beg you to think very differently that this is going to game change the way we do marketing and advertising. Now, the temptation, of course, is, like big marketers and agencies tend to want to do, is we must colonize this space, just like all these other spaces like mobile and all. It's the new sort of hot item, the hot, bright, shiny object. The reality is we may not want to colonize it. It may not be something we actually do ad messaging in, or we do ad units or whatever. It may just simply stop at this point, where we're actually monitoring social behavior and then using that to influence our marketing and our strategic decisions on a writ large basis. Our marketing, our product our product lines, our retail strategy, that kind of stuff. So the real temptation right now, because so great, we get all this data, but there's always that sort of reflex thing that's, okay, we must do something in this space to take advantage of. I would argue for a lot of marketers, they may want to just stop at this point, use this as an input to their business and strategy needs. But to understand better what's going on in the realm of social marketing and social media, absolutely crucial. Okay, so I've beaten that one to death, but data, measurement, and analytics. I think, though, what does all this data bring? I think in addition to just knowing now what's working and what's not, I think we need to be very savvy and very smart that we recognize that performance-based marketing is not only here to stay, but is going to basically ingratiate itself into all forms of marketing. And if you're a creative director in a traditional creative agency, this is something that you need to understand now. And if you don't understand it now, you may want to find something else to do with your life. Because the reality is that brand marketing and brand advertising has historically gotten a free ride, right? The Nielsen methodology of monitoring television has sort of only aided and exacerbated this. We don't really get judged on the quality of the performance of the advertising we do in television, really. I mean, yeah, we've got commercial ratings and stuff, but that really is more of is the TV on and were people, viewing that happen to be tuned in. But when you get into the realm of online, it's the complete opposite, right? Our friends at Google have really done a tremendous job of getting to a sort of cost per action kind of method where you're only paying for success. That seems kind of incongruent, especially if you come from a classic marketing perspective, right? I'm about brand and image and breaking through versus the competition and awareness and remembrances and all those kinds of things, and a brand halo. Those things are not measured on performance. Those are measured more on outcomes that are generally measured after the fact, sales or traction or Q scores and those kinds of things. The reality is that digital is fusing those two together. And I would argue, especially with the biggest brand marketers, you're going to see a very, not only radical collision, but maybe a very unseemly one, where people who are so wedded to the traditional marketing process of brand advertising, meeting with these performance-oriented jockeys with data at the ready, right? It's going to be a very interesting thing to sort of see play out. Because in many cases, you've got different agencies working on different aspects of the business. So you talk to the biggest marketers of the world, the Procter & Gamble's and the Kraft Foods of the world, they'll have separate agencies for brand advertising, for direct marketing if they're involved in that, and promotion marketing stuff, different budgets, different expectations. And that can't be in this world. They have to be all one and the same. And that's challenging to a lot of people. You're going to find a lot of people fighting back on that in the sort of the fiefdom kind of thing. So here's a chart that, if you remember my last iMedia Connection speech in 2004, and I think we cycled off enough people to remember how bad that was, so that's why I'm back here this year. If you look at this chart, on the red bubble, you will see what I would generally call the CPM thing, right? Which is if you drew a dotted line between, a dotted horizontal line between the red bubble and the yellow bubble, just all the way across the chart. The top bubble is what I call the CPM, or the cost per meal or cost per thousand, which is the classic impression-based media equation. That's what we, with the most eyeballs for hopefully the lowest per unit cost. That's the Super Bowl ad, that's the American Idol ad, right? So that's not going to go away. There are clearly advertisers who want to reach lots of people at one time with a big message and hopefully to make some kind of impact. I would argue, because of what's going on in digital, not just things in television, but in all forms of media, especially digital, we're going to see this fusion between that and other stuff below that imaginary dotted line. Well, let's call it below the line type of stuff. So what if, using a classic TiVo example, and this is sort of where I got religion back in 2002 when we first did this with our friends at Starcom and Walt Disney World, where the brand ad gets infused with some digital response or direct response or promotional response goodness underneath. God forbid the X million people who are exposed to that particular ad at one time could actually, with the ease of pushing a button, go a little bit further with that message and get something more out of that, right? So there's the brand message being extremely important, but now having the ability to go a bit further with that message. If you go back to this chart, maybe that first button push of that sort of interactive campaign, that sort of identifying a TiVo, that's actually a different zone. I call that a cost per engagement, let's say. I'm just making up some of these terms. But there should be a little extra charge to the marketer for the small percentage of people that decided that they wanted to go further, right? And the media company, frankly, should be willing to ask more for that because it's a qualified lead. In this case, Walt Disney World, if you've got kids, why haven't you been in Disney World for the last 2 months? Don't you owe it to your kids to go back again for the third time this year? You click the button, and just by clicking that button to go a little bit further, you're engaging a bit. You're saying, you know what, this is interesting to a point where I'm going to stop what I'm doing and preferably not be penalized because I'm watching television, to go a little bit further. And then if you go watch video, if you go click and enter a contest, whatever. But all those things then just go trickle down this curve. So a cost per engagement, the subset of people who say, I still want more information, I'll click again, then it can become a cost per lead with a name and address, an email, or some other kind of piece of information. Theoretically, that could all the way go down to what we call a cost per sale. Right? So but below this imaginary dotted line, I guess you could sort of generally call the cost per action thing. And what I'm arguing is that I just identified in television, a good example, the ability to get multiply paid or multiply benefited or bonused by activity that starts with that brand message. It basically becomes, key term, an open aperture. Right? The brand marketing, the brand advertising becomes an open aperture to going further. And why is this important? Because I think younger audiences today are extremely comfortable and almost expectant of being able to do those kinds of things. Grabbing, tagging, mashing up, bookmarking, saving, doing whatever via their digital and mobile habits and the way they live their lives. And so that's why that wrap leaf chart earlier on becomes so important. So that dynamic on television is pretty obvious, but I think this plays out in more physical media forms too, right? So at the top of this screenshot, you'll see our friends at SnapTel out in Palo Alto, where basically you take your cell phone camera and you take a picture of an image, and it recognizes the image. That could be a label, that could be the side of a box, that could be a barcode, that could be a billboard, right? If I see a billboard, a side of a billboard or a side of a bus, and it's talking about a TV show that's going to premiere later this week, 9 o'clock, 8 Central, I could, in theory, actually in practice, take a picture of that ad, and that could not only send me a text message or something very basic, but hell, why can't that go out to my TV set at home or my TiVo box at home and set a reminder or actually record the show? Pretty interesting stuff. That becomes an impulse buy, strange activity for a TV programmer, an impulse buy for a TV show. That, to me, is that fusion between that brand awareness thing and that activity thing. And again, younger audiences, it's like a no-brainer. It's like a layup for them. Same thing in the realm of Bluetooth and other electronic forms. I mean, I've seen some ads for John Legend's new album via Target, and the strange thing is you have to actually, if you walk to the subway in New York, you have to plug your iPod or something into the actual billboard and stuff, and it feels kind of creepy. You almost kind of want to, have a little, I don't know, some kind of protection before you plug in your iPod into the signage. But you'd think like with a Bluetooth kind of connection or some other short-form thing to actually transmit a sample or an MP3 of one of the lead songs from the album could be a very interesting way for somebody to promote a musical artist and have some of that stuff that the musical artist creates go to one's iPod or one's iPhone or one's mobile phone. Again, this sort of, I call it the dimensionalization of media, but it's an open aperture, right, of a brand message, allowing people, especially younger audiences, very comfortable to go further with that messaging. Okay? Very big idea, very big concept. And I think if you look at the world from the realm of the holding companies, a really challenging one, right? Because, like at Publicis, we got Leo Burnett for creative, and we got Arc Worldwide for promotions, and we'll have a Starcom for media, and we'll have a Digitas for digital. Half of these things I just described to you, they're all 4 of them, okay? And so what do? You have 4 people or 4 groups of people in a room hammering out. I remember our Disney conversations 5 years ago, right? We had brand advertising people in a room. We had direct response people in the room. We had different video ads that were out there. We had two teams of 20 people each. That's got to melt away. It has to. And in 2009, in an economic environment that we're going into, probably the most dire since the Depression, you have to be more measurable and performance-oriented, otherwise you're just not going to get bought. You're not going to get bought, and the campaigns are not going to happen. Marketers just won't stand for it anymore. And if you're in the agency business, you know this because we're getting squeezed by marketers all the time on all these types of metrics, and we can't, frankly, move fast enough. So, a corollary to this, and again, master of the obvious for this room, data-driven creative, right? So let's say we get all this data. Let's say we're starting to process this correctly. We, talk to the creatives about this kind of scenario where audiences that are presented basically determine what creative gets played out, right? So 2 companies that are very interesting in this space, I know there are a bunch of others, but on the top you see some stuff from a company called Tumri in the Bay Area, and on the bottom a company in Chicago called Datomi, which they're different in their approaches and their overall value proposition, but a lot of what they at least hover around is largely similar in that it is taking information, data, now that could be from outside or third-party sources, or even preferably from proprietary sources, internal databases, inventory management systems, CRM, loyalty programs, whatever, marrying that against web behavior or viewer behavior, and actually serving up ad messages in a templatized or componentized form accordingly. Okay? Now, you talk to any traditional creative director in a traditional agency setting, and digital too, and this is like, you might as well just get up back in your spaceship and fly back to Jupiter, right? Because it's a non-linear creative process that is so new and so foreign to the traditional process of creative, it just doesn't compute. And that's a problem, because it has to compute. We have to get to this kind of an environment where, because of audiences and the granular definitions of these audiences, and use your favorite ad targeting technology, whether it's behavioral or location-based, or, there's a whole bunch of different ways to slice and dice, or geographical, or whatever. The reality is that's information that's telling us something. If you have some head start on somebody's past purchase behavior with you, their inclination to spend money with your brand or your service, whatever, you should take advantage of that and not serve them up a generic holier-than-thou brand ad that is, we're going to run in the Super Bowl. But why not target that a bit more definitively to an audience that is preferably already interested or previously or just inclined to be interested. If you're in the airline business, you look at the Datomi example on the bottom. I mean, if you've got 3 seats left on a particular airplane, you want to get those seats off, and then when that last seat is gone, you don't want to serve up that ad to that person with the promise of an airline seat that doesn't exist anymore, right? So this, to me, I think revolutionizes. You look at our folks our friends in New York called Visible World. They've been sort of at this idea for almost 10 years now, and I think finally the time it's starting to dawn on people that creating templatized or componentized video assets similarly, right, where the first 5 seconds, the second 5 seconds, they're all different if-then statements. Now, I'm not saying it all goes to this direction, but I do think that creative and digital and targeting have to start working much more hand in hand with each other and need to be outside of these silos. And the agency business, especially in the big 6, we're really good at silos. Okay? That has to change. And if it doesn't, I would argue if it doesn't happen under our own watch, it's going to be done for us. And the results may not be very pretty. Right? So a lot of this is sort of tough love. People like me and there are a bunch of others have been saying this for years. I mean, I would argue the time to change your roof is not when it's raining. Okay? The problem is now we're in the midst of a pretty big storm, so we got to hammer those nails much faster. And this is stuff that clients will appreciate because they'll see value in this. If there's an investment, they'll see the payoff in it. Why wouldn't you? Right? If you sell stuff, if you advertise, why wouldn't you be interested in realigning your activities, streamlining all of them into environments like this? So what I'm arguing is that I think largely with this little sort of corner of this conversation, this is a challenge to the creative community, right? If you don't understand the media dynamics that are going on because for whatever reason your agency has different departments, different groups and stuff, or you're not appreciative or understanding of data coming in and its influence about how creative gets played out, you should start to learn, and pretty quickly. Because you're going to find a lot of friends on the media buying side and the data and analytics side who are desperate, right? Desperate to cross that chasm between all this wealth of information that we have and the need to put out creative goodness that can take advantage of it. I think you're seeing struggles now in the big holding companies. I mean, at Starcom, we've got this group called Pixel. The reason that Pixel exists, which is focused on digital creative, the reason why it exists is because they didn't see any partnership or any other agencies within the Publicis family that Starcom was related to that could step up and do the creative thing given all this information and this data. And there have been a number of other media agencies that have been similarly stepping up. So is media the new creative? Some people think that's the path. I don't know. But it has to be a better marriage, a better blend of those two. Again, this shouldn't be, this should be obvious to people in this room. So we talked earlier about transparency. We talked earlier about open systems and whatnot. So if you don't believe anything of what I just said and you think this is something that we can still sort of wait and sort of ride out as 2009 hopefully goes quicker and we can get to 2010. Just look at some of the logos on this chart and you tell me what business we are in the agency world, right? When we now live in a world where it's not only theoretically possible, but actually possible to basically have a credit card and a laptop to create advertising campaigns without any intermediary known as an agency, right? The spot runners of the world, the spot mixers of the world, the ability to create video ads from static assets. A company in Chicago called Liquidus that does this now for Comcast and Cox Cable, where literally all you need if you're a realtor, a restaurant, or whatever, are just a few slides of your office, of your properties, of your restaurant, and some text, and a phone number, and the web address, and maybe some voiceover, or maybe not. They'll provide the music. Boom. Voila, you have a 30-second, 15-second, 60-second on-demand video ad. Right? Spot Mixer, kind of doing this already with the AdSense and AdWords people at Google, creating video out of text ads. It may only be 60 or 70% of the full advertising, but literally all you need to do is get the data, the names, the words that are part of that listing, and you can start to create, using some generic video sources, an actual video ad. Now, I'm not saying it's the highest quality, but sometimes it's just good enough for Joe the plumber or Fred the pizzeria or whatever. In the audio space, a company like Target Spot in New York, basically doing the same thing for audio, starting with online audio. But if you believe, like I do, that what is online audio today becomes basically audio everywhere, IP-delivered audio, where literally you turn on, you go in your car and you can hear access to any internet radio station you want, courtesy of broadband wireless. That's a big deal. The ability to long tail my way into an audio ad on whatever targeted or music service that I'm offering, even if it's something like a Last FM or a Pandora, which is all personalized music stuff. The ability to long tail and self-serve my way into creating an audio ad. I don't have any radio experience. I've never done an audio ad in my life. Again, keywords, generic music beds, and just your URL and how people can follow up and find out more information. It's getting ridiculously easy. And don't think that this isn't going to happen on a grander scale, because you look at a 2009, a 2010, economic forces. I mean, just look at how you turn on your cable television when you go back to your rooms tonight or when you go back home. Watch some of the commercial pods. I know most of you in the DVR crowd don't watch commercial pods, but watch them and sort of ask yourself, look at the quality, quote unquote, or the relative quality of the ads that you're starting to see. I don't know about you, but I'm starting to see a lot more call now. I'm seeing a lot more direct response type of ads. That tells me, or per inquiry ads, which tells me that there's an inventory issue out there. I don't know how many media sellers sort of want to admit it. I don't know if that's translating online as well. But there's an opportunity there, maybe through the front door of direct response, to get, and there's an increasing plethora of media avails out there to do this stuff with. It's a no-brainer for a media seller to have a long-tail solution such as these, to have in the mixing bowl, so that they can focus on their premium sales efforts and let the smaller fries of the market self-serve their way to fill up all this extra inventory. Okay? What you don't hear or don't see are agencies in the middle of that process. And I will tell you, especially in the big six, nobody wants to believe that these kind of companies exist, and if they do, they don't think that their big brand big brand advertisers with their big marketing budgets are going to ever play in that space or going to care. And I think that's dangerous thinking. Because who's to say? I mean, I look at the marketer edition of Ballyhoo. I look at a company like Live Technology in Westchester County, New York. These are companies that are allowing people to create national templates of ads and then allow their local providers, their local agents, their local retailers to self-serve or create with their own local sensibilities the ads that work for them in that market, again, without injuring the national brand sensibility. That's very empowering if you're just a local insurance agent in the middle of the country. You want the support of your big national brand, but you also want the way you market in Topeka, Kansas is a little bit different than you're going to how you market in Manhattan. And again, technologies like this how many times in my ventures role do I hear, you know what, we're not getting a lot of traction with the agencies, we're going directly to the clients themselves. Right? We heard that a lot of times, right? And then it's the old age-old, well, they're going to call us anyway, or they can't handle it themselves. I don't know. I think what's at stake here, and I think some of your earlier speakers may have talked about this yesterday and certainly today, I think the very value of what an agency does is absolutely compromised in the next couple of years, right? Our value proposition is absolutely questionable in a world where consumers can create their own ads, can start to do some of the sophisticated media planning and buying things that we historically have done exclusively in our own little club, and now in an open, transparent kind of way, literally see, as we said before, some of the data about what's working and what's not. If an agency really wants to be a valued partner in that mix, we all need to step up and do all these things I'm talking about. I see that happening in bits and pieces. I don't see that holistically happening across the board. And that's, I think, the real challenge that we all have to get to. It's not about demanding that we're going to buy more things if you can measure better, or I'm tired. I'm tired of it as a ventures person. I'm very, very discouraged by people and the stories I hear back like, this is pretty interesting stuff, but I can't talk to you until you're in 20 million homes or more. Okay? That kind of logic is the exact reason why holding companies and classic media agencies and classic brand agencies miss the boat on stuff like search. Okay? And we're still scrambling to catch up with how we deal with the search monster that Google basically helped create and others like them. I think we have a blind spot with things like mobile. I think we're completely flailing on the realm of social. And what else? I mean, there's tons of other things that are just piling up as these digital, interesting, shiny objects that are not mass and mainstream. And I would argue there are a bunch of marketers who are kind of saying, you know what? These things are not only shiny, they actually may be valuable too. And the constant conversation is, okay, agency X, what are you doing about this space? And then the Keystone Cops about, okay, we'll be on top of that, or we'll buy something. Okay, that can't happen anymore. Because to be honest with you, in an open, transparent kind of world, marketers are starting to know better. And if you don't think they are, you're going to be in for a very rude awakening. Okay, so let me just segue with sort of one last thought here. What I'm sort of hinting at on top of all this is that consumer-driven communication and content is a completely new paradigm, a completely new dynamic in our world, right? Classically, we agencies have always been in the middle between marketers with their budgets and their need to better get avails bought and placed in the various media forms who are basically responsible for gathering people up in the tent to be marketed to. What I'm arguing is that because of this world of transparency that we're in, it is now incumbent upon the marketers and the agencies actually now to target the audiences themselves and for us to aggregate those audiences to whatever scale we need. Meaning, I don't think we can only rely on media companies who sell us audiences to get us there by themselves. We can't just sit back and be the best media buyer of an increasingly large amount of media avails to get our messages out to the right audiences. We may need, and I tell clients this all the time, those who listen, to actually start creating content and distributing stuff ourselves. Right? I'm not saying kick ESPN.com to the curb, certainly not. But there may be things to do in addition to those big premium media brand environments that we can do on our own. So for example, you look at a company like Daylife, DAYLIFE.com, out of New York. They are a company that basically are in what I call the API for news business. They are basically trying to help media companies, especially those that are interested in news, to effectively grab and get all kinds of data and information about various topics that they're interested in, literally served to them on the fly and incorporate into whatever their news products are. We've taken some of that and said, look, go to a brand and do the same thing. You look at a Purina, which Denuo was helpful in doing. Purina we worked with Daylife, and basically Purina said, look, dogs and cats are our bread and butter. With Daylife, we're basically able to grab all kinds of positive news stories about dogs and cats and pet ownership, roll that up into a branded opportunity that Purina can own. It can be I don't forget what they call it, the Purina Pet Charts or Purina something. But there's no media company in the middle. Ostensibly, they're there because a story from Food Network or HGTV or whatever, or some news source gets fed into that. But it's Purina's news source, not the AP or the Chicago Tribune or whatever selling us the pet column, right? That's the dynamic we're living in now. Marketers can go and advertisers can go directly to the sources of stuff. And frankly, consumers are already creating their own stuff via blogging and whatever, it's completely upending the value proposition. So I look at, in video, right? There's these thousands and thousands of choices out there, right? So you look at a company like Blinks, which is one of a bunch of different companies in the quote-unquote video search space. Where is the aggregation play? Where is the curation play for that? So if I'm a Purina, maybe I should not only do that for news articles via Daylife, but maybe I should work with a Blinks or somebody like them to create a curation video strategy where Purina becomes the authoritative sponsored source of dog and cat video information from trusted sources, filtered, right? Helping consumers find stuff, as well as helping brands and helping marketers better curate things into meaningful brand experiences. But I don't know. I don't know how this plays out. How does it work in blogs? If I'm consuming an increasing amount of my content not going directly to the .com sites, or not even clicking through to them, but just literally reading stuff in a blog reader, that kind of communication, I don't know. Where does the marketer play into that? Maybe we do, maybe we don't. Is it a feedo? Is it a feed burner? I don't know. Is a display ad appropriate in these environments? I don't know. If I'm microblogging, right, is this a colonizable event? I don't know. Maybe, maybe not. But this is the kind of things that are taking people's time, and this is sapping especially younger audiences. They don't seem to be watching MTV anymore, right? And it's clear, and that's something we can buy, whether we believe the seller or not, and what's the audience that's out there. But you want to know where people are? They're tweeting with each other, or about each other, about things. Where's the ad marketing message there? I don't know. I mean, these are communications and content scenarios that are coming from the ground up that were not created by big media. And again, I would argue we in the agency community have really good at understanding big media. I mean, if you want to buy something like the Super Bowl, it's probably a good place to go is through somebody like us. But if you're trying to figure out a tweet strategy for, microblogging for a certain subset of the audience, I don't know. Maybe we are, maybe we're not. I would argue marketers are starting to ask these very questions. And in a world where, like with our friends at Threadless in Chicago, another good Chicago company, anybody who's not been to Threadless, this is like user-generated fashion lines, right? This is a t-shirt company that basically solicits ideas for t-shirt designs and then basically puts it up to the community's vote. And if you don't make it, if you make the vote, then you go to production. And only then, after your first product run, do you get reprinted and reprinted. It's all based on open source and the marketplace. It says they're the ones that get you printed in the first place, and then they're also the ones that dictate whether your sales continue or not. How does a marketer play in this world? I don't know. Is this a sponsorable environment? I don't know. All I'm getting at is that the way communications and content are going right now, the way consumers connect with each other is not classic top-down media funnel-dumb. And if we're still connected to that, if we're looking for the best avails to get our marketing messages out there, we're only doing half the job. So if you haven't figured out what VivaKi is, it's basically doing something or getting off the pot, right? And it is time for us, again, I'm talking mostly people in the agency business, to kind of look at ourselves in the mirror and say, okay, what are we going to be part of the solution, or are we going to continue to be part of the problem? I would argue we've made some tremendous inroads, and obviously there are a bunch of sellers in here too who probably know where all those pain points are, where we need to improve. But if we think that bigness is going to get us there, we're deluding ourselves. If we think classic approaches to media buying and analysis of audiences is going to get us there, we're deluding ourselves. I think there are a lot of traditional marketing and advertising conventions where we are just short of being delusional. It is time, especially in a dour economic environment, to reinvent what it means to be a quote-unquote agency. And our marketing friends are just as desperate as we might be to figure out the answers. And the time to show value is now. Because if you don't, when we get out of all of this, the generational change and the cyclical change, we may see some litter along the way, and it may not be pretty. So with the remaining 3 or 4 minutes, I'm happy to take a question or two, but that's hopefully my tough love for today, and hopefully it was helpful. And again, I know it was obvious to most of you here, but if this isn't a level of urgency in your respective organizations, hopefully you will take a little bit of this with you and inject a little bit of it before the holidays. So thank you very much.
Now?
I think we have, sorry, your microphone, and then we'll go to, yeah.
Hi, Russell Quinton at Traction San Francisco. My question is, I'm sorry, did I jump ahead of
No,
somebody?
next microphone goes right up here on the front. Go ahead.
You know, the traditional linear process that agencies have always gone through with learning and strategic planning, creative development, so forth, media has always been at the end for a very long time. And now with the amount of data and insights and new tactics, dynamically driven content that comes from behaviors, right, that's happening in real time, it feels like there needs to be a change agent inside of our agencies that's almost moving forward more upstream back into the strategic process. My question to you is, who do I need to be hiring right now at my agency that fills that role of bringing this level of insight and the opportunities that are available so that we can start the communication planning phase for developing these kind of tactics as well as the branded communications that we would traditionally do?
That's a really tough question, right? I mean, I think the gut reaction is perhaps look for people who don't have traditional or just general agency experience. So the proverbial outsider with a fresh thought kind of approach. Maybe that's somebody who's been in a marketing role at a company that's been more entrepreneurial and startup in nature because they've just had to do everything themselves without having to sort of go through traditional funnels and channels. The other thing to sort of consider, and this is sort of a writ large statement, I know I just snap my fingers and it happens, is maybe you just start from scratch on the outside and rebuild it. You know? So you basically say, I mean, the one thing it's ironic because the last 10 years or so we've seen unbundling of functions in the agency holding companies, and then the holding companies just getting bigger and bigger. So this oligopoly of 5 or 6 big companies. And it's ironic because it's happened at exactly the same time that digital has exploded to being now the core of activity, not the ancillary, not the new shiny object, but the core. And to me, maybe the root of your answer is, how can you root your organization, right, to be cored, centered, kerneled with digital, and then radiate everything else there outward? Because frankly, everything in media, even as I said or showed earlier, like with print and out of home, those all have digital elements now. All media is basically digital. Certainly some is more than others, but if you start there, you really can't go wrong because it just radiates out from there. If you're trying to retrain somebody who is, an expert in classic television and print and all that stuff, it's going to be much harder. And I think the same applies for sellers too, because I think you're seeing finally some of the big media companies that didn't make the transitions fast enough starting to flail and go bankrupt or go out of business. You're going to see more of that in 2009. Centering, you can't center yourself more into digital, and you can't do that fast enough. And I think the best people who are going to be most holistic and understanding of all those kinds of things in that shift are probably people who are not from the past, but maybe from other environments who are more willing to do it differently because they don't know any better. I know that's cheap consulting, but consider what you paid for it, which is, go ahead.
You actually covered it in the explanation of selling into your own organization.
Okay, so I actually addressed a question, which is first time this month, so thank you.
Hi, Tim. Adam Kimmick. How are you?
Very well, thank you.
I guess my question would be, at what point are we measuring for the sake of measurement and over-measurement? And two programs I can think of that I worked on specifically where, take TV, where we'll run something through ASI or Ipsos ahead of time through a panel. Now, we've crafted a spot to meet the needs of the panel, to get sold through, and of course, it never ends up actually being what ends up getting run. So really, what's the value then of the testing piece? And so the two things that came to my mind initially were working with Crispin when I was at ConAgra on the client side on the Orville Dedenbacher work, which was tested ahead of time and imploded, and working on BMW films at Fallon, which wasn't tested ahead of time and obviously exploded positively.
Agreed. So this the sort of over-analysis paralysis thing, sort of the new Coke business case strategy, all that stuff, tested through the roof, and then boom, nothing. I guess most of my comments were mostly focused on not on the prep part, but more on the results part, right? So all the things that I sort of alluded to before were about media performance and activity and success ratios. I think really the answer is, the problem, of course, is where do you start, right? Because it's basically a circle, and it's virtuous or vicious depending on your perspective. You've got to start somewhere, right? So if you want to take a decent stab at doing research and on a particular ad campaign and then do it. But then you can't just do a postmortem after the fact. You need to use that as your next input to the next cycle. That's why the wrap leaf social media thing is interesting, because that may be a very quick way to get a temperature gauge of what's going on in the marketplace, for good or for worse, about one's brand or one's product ideas or new product launch or whatever, and not necessarily responding by doing something in social media, but using that as an input for this cycle, right? So a couple of things I would say. Panels, I was arguing earlier, in a world of digital, we should be getting more towards census, which is more close to actual, and the ability to aggregate that data to tell stories. The idea, hopefully, is that you're going to get to better successes in the real world than sort of finely crafted samples. And the other thing is, again, consider it as a cycle, right? You need to, every data point literally just feeds the next set of data points. And it's not one campaign starts and stops and another campaign starts and stops. And I think the agency business has historically been really good at that. Postmortems in media, that kind of stuff. It needs to be much more holistic and much more ongoing. And frankly, you make go and no-go decisions over time, right? So if the dead Orville Redenbacher doesn't work, pull the plug on it, use that as information, and then put that into your next series of things, which should already be underway as well. It's a little different for the creative thing than it is on the media side, but it's always, I guess the best way I could describe it is always optimize, always be optimizing, right? Because it's always a circle, flow of life, VivaKi. There you go, there's the connection. Any other questions? That's it, I'm getting the rung. Thank you very much.
Thanks, let's thank Tim.